Hi, I'm BJ, and this is the Arcane Alienist Podcast. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Arcane Alienist. Thanks for joining me today. Today I've got a review of Tales of the Valiant, the new 5e variant by Kobold Press. But first I've got a call from the Pink Phantom, so let's hear what the Phantom has to say.
Hey, BJ, the Pink Phantom here. I really enjoyed your episode with Carl where you talked about goblins, hobgoblins, and bugbears and how they could be, a different stages of development, or how they could show that their relationship with languages and how languages of creatures in general could show maybe what groups were more related to each other or work together more. And you're theorizing on what other types of monster groups could have those kinds of interwoven relationships. And I think it's a great idea just, to unveil kind of the world building, to have creatures that are related, have related languages, so that as PCs encounter them, they realize that maybe these two groups have something in common, even if they encounter them in disparate parts of the game world or at different times, and particularly if they don't necessarily physically approximate each other. Y'all had asked what other kind of groupings there could be. I think one of the ones that pops to mind immediately is among the undead, and this has, of course, a lot of precedent where what we think of as intelligent undead, like liches or vampires, will employ or hold sway over lesser types of undead, like zombies and skeletons and ghouls. But one idea that's always bounced around in my head is this idea that trolls with their regenerative abilities, to the extent that you cut part of a troll off and it eventually will find its way to the rest of the troll and recombine. That sounds a lot like something I would associate, although I don't know that it's ever really been canon in any of the different fantasy versions of the various types of oozes and slimes. Seems like kind of a natural thing. I think you see it maybe more in, horror type fiction, or maybe some sci-fi type stories with some sort of alien creature that has sort of an amoeboid type makeup, where you split it in two and then it recombines, or it splits off into two different types of creature. And I've just always, had it in my head that maybe what trolls are is they are the humanoid version of gelatinous cubes and oozes and slimes, just as a gelatinous cube has essentially come into being to wreak havoc in dungeons. Because, what's a cube for other than to go, through hallways and around 90-degree bends and things like that? But that trolls are a version of these amorphous creatures that, just as gelatinous cubes take on a cube shape, they take on a humanoid shape. So those are just kind of some generic thoughts on the subject. I really enjoyed what you and Carl did, and look forward to your next episodes.
Thanks for the call, everybody. That was the Pink Phantom of Phantom Thoughts. A really good podcast. You should check it out. He does a lot of interesting stuff, just commentary on old school gaming in general, but he's doing some solo play in his own sort of campaign world, where a lot of it is just procedurally generated from the tables that you find in the array of AD&D books, the Monster Manual, and the Dungeon Master's Guide and stuff like that. Really interesting. At first, he was focused on a group of adventurers and their exploits, but now he's kind of shifted into some of the humanoids they've encountered and dealt with, and what happened when those groups sort of wandered off away following the encounter. So it's a really cool series of episodes. Go check it out. Also, his real deep dive into Muster, a really good primer on how to kind of get your head back into the space of the way D&D was played back in the 70s with the original, with Gygax and maybe his original crew. So check out the Phantom Thoughts. I'll put a link in the show description. But thanks for the call. A couple things. You have that language of the undead. That's really kind of an interesting, in you see it. I can't remember which Lord of the Rings film it's in, where they talk about the black speech of Mordor and it harms the ears of everybody else, and don't speak that here. Um, I kind of always wondered if that would be a cool. I mean, we think of that maybe as being a demonic language or a language of the lower planes, but it would be interesting if undead creatures naturally spoke that, and you had to sort of maybe a challenge of speaking with the undead, with particularly without magic, is do you speak that language and do you dare speak it aloud so you could commune with an intelligent undead? And is that the language they speak to when they speak to one another? Particularly if you think about a wight or a lich or a vampire and a powerful intelligent undead commanding its minions and thralls and things like that. So yeah, language families are really interesting. I may spend a little more time on that in the future. I've got some ideas percolating in the mind. As for trolls being related to gelatinous cubes or other slimes or oozes, that's a really cool idea. That's very fascinating. Certainly, again, pulls them further out of the realm of here's just another large humanoid monster that's just kind of there to be a larger variant. I know the regeneration is what really makes trolls unique, but at some level they're just sort of another intermediating as humanoids get bigger and more powerful, right? Um, Although that does beg the question: if you don't change other things about the troll, they're vulnerable to acid, and yet the gelatinous cube and the other slimes and oozes tend to use acidic uh, attacks to kill and consume their prey. So how would that work with a troll? Would they be acidic on the inside but vulnerable to acid on the outside, and the acid on the outside eats through their outer layer, and then what do you get? This gush of like the acid inside them that then it could be a kind of final attack then during their death throes. I don't know. Lots of interesting ideas. My head's going a lot of different directions. So, but yeah, thanks again for the call. I really appreciate it. So take care, and I hope to hear from you again soon. So when Hasbro wanted to rescind the open gaming license, um, and it wasn't sure, we weren't sure what they could. A lot of people were saying from the beginning, you can't do that. And ultimately, they relented on any effort for the time being to do it, including putting the 5e open gaming license in Creative Commons, so it's always there. And I guess their strategy is going to be to try to create a better version of the game that more people will want to play moving forward. But one of the things Kobold Press did, which I think was very clever, and I don't know if this is 100% why they were doing it, but it's what seems to me what they were doing. So take this with a grain of salt. This is just my kind of guess as to what's maybe going on. Is Kobold Press pretty heavily was into 5e supplements. They created this entire really interesting campaign world of Midgard, with its own source books, not only as a campaign setting, but expanded rules for different types of magic, for other playable species, for other subclasses, for the D&D classes. Very rich world that's very interesting to play in. To me, part of my getting into Pathfinder is when I play Pathfinder, I'll play Pathfinder with friends because that's what the game is being played, and I have a good time. It's still a fun game. But I've never really been sold on the Galarian setting that Paizo put forward to be the default for Pathfinder. But the Midgard setting that Kobold Press, I really, something about that just really speaks to me. I really enjoy it. So, and I like pulling ideas from it, and I like the idea of just playing a game in that setting, which I'm going to start doing, hopefully, as we ramp up with me kind of playing Tales of the Valiant. So anyway, but what Kobold Press did was, I think we know from much of the discussion, most of us know that there is legal precedent that has been said you can't copyright or trademark a game mechanic or a game procedure. You can only copyright the expression. And that's why you get all these local variants of Monopoly. If you look in you go to a local store and you see, there's probably a Monopoly where you live based on a city or a university or a sports team, or nobody has to pay Hasbro any royalties for that because they cannot copyright the rules to Monopoly, only the expression Monopoly. So no one can create a Monopoly board that looks like Monopoly's trademarked board with that. But you can take the game process itself and give other variants of it, and you're free and clear. So they can't really do that with 5e, although it wasn't clear how much they could protect. I think at the time when they started this, well, uh, what Kobold Press did was create its own open gaming, not its own OGL, its own system reference doc called Black Flag, which is 5e, and they changed some of the wording so that they weren't infringing on any expression of the rules, and I think seemed to take that opportunity to maybe create some alternate versions of character and monster mechanics. Not that you can't, it's not playing 5e, but that probably could have just been a volume on house rules and alternative options to pair with 5e if none of this had ever happened. But so it does change a little bit. But truly, I think the goal here is that I could build a character using the 2014 Player's Handbook and everything that came out for 5e prior to this new shift of them moving to the kind of updated version of it. Or theoretically, probably even stuff that's coming from Hasbro later this year in the new Player's Handbook. I could create a character there and play it right alongside at the table a character created through Black Flag. I think that's really cool. So they're not trying to limit your fun or saying only play with our stuff, only in our sandbox, only our property. They're still in that spirit of, hey, let's make this compatible with what other folks are doing out there, so we can all kind of share ideas and mix and match, and the players and the community win when we do that. That's the message I take from it. They're not saying that explicitly in any of the published stuff, but it seems to have the spirit, that original spirit of the OGL from back when it started, with third edition. So what they did, they did Black Flag. They did a Kickstarter to publish their own Monster Vault and Player's Guide. I got in on that. When I first got the books and started looking at it, I'm like, wow, this isn't that different from 5e. Maybe I shouldn't have invested. I could have just got the PDFs cheaper once they went to widespread distribution. But the more I looked at it, the more happy I am that I supported Kobold Press just when I could in their efforts. I think it's a great company. I like all their products. Wolfgang Bauer, who's kind of the head guy there, is the guy who wrote Tyranny of Dragons. If you remember the Tyranny of Dragons, which is the original kind of adventure path or whatever they want to call it for 5e, got a lot of criticism early on, and it turns out that he didn't have the full 5e rule set to work on when he created the adventure, or he would have done some things very differently. And they later released a revised edition of it that kind of fits better with the rules as they finally shook out. So my understanding is much better. I haven't gone back and looked at it in depth, but I might now, because I'm kind of on the I'm kind of really I like what Bauer's putting out there. So hopefully we don't hear some deep dark secrets. That seems to happen every time I really like somebody. There's some deep dark secret that comes out once they're in the spotlight. Hopefully we won't have that happen here. Anyway, so Black Flag turns into is actually the game rule system, but their expression of it for fantasy is kind of generic fantasy role playing adventure is Tales of the Valiant. That's the actual name of the game. So I got through and I managed to play this week with Carl Rodriguez. I think maybe not this coming week, but I think the first week of August is when Amy told me they'll go live play with me, Carl, Amy, and my son actually joins us and plays a character. And we just did sort of a lair encounter from one of the Kobold Press's Book of Lairs, just to kind of test out the rules. We had a good time. I think we're going to keep doing that and try to slowly work these characters up a few levels and see how the system works. But that's what Tales of the Valiant is. It's sort of there. It was a way Kobold Press, and what I think was very clever about this is they had kind of put a lot out there for 5e, and if 5e goes away, suddenly they've got a lot of obsolete books, right? When they weren't sure how backwards compatible D&D going forwards. I think the way they're heading with D&D, you still could use all the pre-existing Kobold books with it if you wanted to, with just a little bit of tweaking. But focusing on Tales of the Valiant, this very much reminds me of original Pathfinder, which you could call D&D edition 3.75. This really could be a 5th edition 5e.5, 5e.25. I don't know if we're going to call the new D&D 5e.5. If this is just that's 5e.5a, and this could be 5e.5b. It's still close enough to fifth edition that if you're an experienced game master, very little work to make things work together, which I think is kind of cool again. But I want to go through and talk about some of the changes that just popped out. I won't go through everything, but having run a game with we had a fighter, we had a warlock, and we had this is the mechanist class, which is their kind of answer to the artificer, which I'll talk about in a second. But let's go through some of the general changes. They do have a conversion guide for free at the Kobold Press website that can summarizes the general changes to characters and monsters if you want to import stuff from other sources, including if you want to, they've only got a couple of subclasses for all the classes. So if you want to pull in 5e subclasses that you like, it tells you how to kind of adjust them enough to kind of fit with their versions, or how to pull in monsters. There's just a couple of changes they've made to monsters. And so you can actually use the Wizards of the Coast D&D 5e stuff that has content not open to that they can't use for Black Flag, because they are intellectual property, like Mind Flayers, Beholders, a lot of the stuff in some of their other supplemental monster books. This is how you can use those here with Tales of the Valiant. The other cool thing is this keeps relevant. The one thing that probably is the coolest thing Kobold Press, I think, has done for 5 years, the Tomes of Beasts, I think would be the correct way you say that properly, not because it's a Tome of Beasts. There's 3 of them, 1, 2, and 3 Tomes of Beasts, along with a Creature Codex, which has some really cool monsters that really seem to fit well in sort of the vibe of sort of D&D style fantasy, but are very original and fresh sometimes. And a lot of times you'll see people create supplemental monsters and they're like, hey, that just doesn't seem to, something about that just doesn't hit the vibe of D&D. I think most of the stuff that they've put in the Tomes of Beasts and then the Creature Codex fit for D&D, but also fit very well with their Midgard setting. So again, that's one of the things I really like about the Midgard setting, is it feels like a good D&D style setting with some original ideas and original concepts, and it's very, I don't know, I mean, other people may feel differently, but I know I really like it. Anyway, enough delay. Let's talk about a little bit about what's in this conversion guide, and I think that'll tell you what has kind of where they're going here. So for general changes, they say look at Chapter 6, Playing the Game, the Player's Guide. That changing how they abbreviate. They've gone back to the capital STR, capital CON, capital DX, that style of abbreviated reference to ability scores. That's probably not as interesting. Let's see. They don't have alignments. They've just removed alignment from the game completely. They have Luck, which is a PC resource that replaces Inspiration. Inspiration, I have never seen Inspiration successfully used at the table the way it's written. There's always some variant of how people do it, and when you try to play it rules as written, my experience is people just kind of forget about it. Recall that with Inspiration, you get Inspiration, and the player's handbook and the DMG and other books are even inconsistent about when you're supposed to award Inspiration. If you just go with the player's handbook, the idea is when you do something compelling as a player character, that's when you should get Inspiration, particularly if you're picking maybe a less than optimal or less than ideal strategy or solution that is very inconsistent, though, with how you fleshed out with the characters' personality traits, bonds, flaws, ideals, things like that. You're supposed to get an Inspiration point for that. I really think they just cribbed Fate and tried to tack it onto 5e with that. But you either have Inspiration or you don't. And then you can spend Inspiration to get advantage on a roll, but you have to remember to declare that you want to use Inspiration beforehand to get the advantage. You can't just go, oh, it's not a re-roll where, oh, I failed, let me re-roll that, although that's where I've seen it default to for most people when they use it. So you're supposed to remember to roll it ahead of time to give yourself advantage. But what I've seen people do is they save it thinking, I don't want to use it now, 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 and then they just kind of ultimately forget that they have Inspiration over time. Because you can only have Inspiration one point or one quantity of inspiration. You either have it or you don't. There's no banking it and having 3 or 4 inspiration points the way you can with hero points, action points, fate points, and other systems that use that kind of a meta currency. And so then they just forget about it. The GM forgets about it. The other thing is it's very unwieldy as a GM if you've got 4 or 5 players who each have 5 or 6 distinct personality traits and ideals and motivations, and you have to remember, oh, hey, you did that. Consistent with those things for your character. Here's inspiration. So I've tried even myself trying to remind characters, hey, put in a bid for inspiration. Remind me, hey, I'm doing something that I think ought to earn inspiration, but the players forget to do it because they have to keep up with all that stuff while they're trying to manage the mechanics of their game. So they've canned inspiration and they've replaced it with luck. And how, of course, that also means they've changed kind of that lucky feat to match this in their expression of the luck feat. But luck is you can have up to 5 points of luck. You start with no luck at first level. I think you can bank it from session to session and level to level, but you can only ever have 5 points of luck. You get a luck whenever you fail an attack or a saving throw. Not necessarily a skill check, but when you fail an attack or a saving throw. As long as it's not a critical 1 fail on the attack roll, you don't get it for that, but you can get it otherwise for missing or for failing a saving throw. And there are no critical fails on saves, so even if you roll a 1 on a save, which also means you can pass a save by rolling a 1 if your bonus is high enough and the DC is low enough. Just that's how saves work in the 5th edition engine. But if you fail a save or fail an attack roll without making a critical failure of a nat 1, you get a point of luck. You can't spend it on that roll, but you can spend it later. When other things come up. You can have up to 5 points of luck if you have 5 and you then fail in a situation where you should get another point of luck instead of going to 6. You erase all your luck. You roll a d4, and that's how much luck you have. So if you have 5 and you haven't spent any, and you get another place where you should get luck, the most you can do is preserve 4 of those luck. So it's going to give you, So there's an incentive to spend the luck because hey, we're going to fail attack rolls and saving throws pretty frequently throughout the course of the game. It's not like it's not going to come back. I don't need to hold on to it till that perfect moment because we're going to get opportunities to replenish it pretty frequently through the game. And there's also this sort of disincentive to hoard it at 5 because, oh no, I failed. And now I've lost, at least 1 point of luck, potentially, 4 points of luck because, I'll roll a d4 and maybe come out here with 1 luck left, which would have been the luck I would have gotten anyway from the failure that triggered that. So I'm interested to see how that plays over time. We didn't get to see it in the game, but I think if we play more, we'll see. And I like the idea that there's a ebb and flow to that, sort of like momentum in Modifius's 2d20 stuff. It also reminds me of the way action points were used in 4th edition, which I thought was a good way that you're going to get an action point every so often. So don't hoard them. Go ahead and spend them because more are coming. So that's good. But what you can use luck for is you can either spend luck point to point to try to push up the result of a roll when you fail. Now, if you choose to do this, you don't get your new luck point for the failure. But if you fail and it's not a critical fail and you've got luck banked, you can. So I roll a 12. I've got 4 luck. I want to put 2 of those in there and move that up to a 14. You kind of have to guess. There's a push your luck. No pun intended. Risk reward there of, well, was that going to be enough? And so. Odds are if you rolled a 3 on something in most challenges, it's probably not worth spending the luck to try to fix it. But if you feel like you're pretty close, or you can spend 3 luck points combined to just re-roll. That's how it works. Advantage and disadvantage are still part of this game, but this is simply when you get that final result. You can spend 3 luck on a re-roll. And players can give each other, they can pass their luck points back and forth to one another. So it is a group resource as well. To keep in mind of. So it does cause a little bit of that metagaming if you don't like metagaming or meta currency that makes you metagame. I'm thinking of Jason Connerly. But I think it's going to work better than Inspiration did in 5e. They put magic items in the player's guide for reference. Part of that is because they didn't do their GM's guide as part of the first Kickstarter, and I think they wanted you to be able to play with their rules right out of the gate. So they go ahead and put magic items. And what player at this point of the game does not have access to the Dungeon Master's Guide and can't look through and see what the magic items do? And it's good for players once they get a magic item to have that reference in front of them. So the idea of, well, we got magic items in the locked away in the DMG where players can't see them, I think we're past that. So I don't think it hurts to have them in the player's guide. But they're not really priced in a way. They've got some gold piece prices in case you want to do that. But the book actually says that's kind of here in case. Players shouldn't start getting the idea of there's a magic item market and I'm going to save up and buy my +2 longsword because here's the price. Here's kind of the standard price. That what used to happen in third edition D&D, fourth edition D&D, and Pathfinder, and even in 5e they tried to get away from that, and that's preserved here. But there are prices just in case you need them for some reason. Monster stack blocks are a little more streamlined. It's still mostly what you would expect from if you're familiar with the stat blocks for monsters from 5e. The blocks no longer give skill proficiencies, saving throw proficiencies, or proficiency bonuses. They're just sort of there in the stat block. What it doesn't really tell you what the bonus is. It just tells you. Let me grab one real quick. So anything that's relevant to what you would want to use the monster for is just listed in the things they can do, the descriptions of things they can do. Any bonuses, penalties, or that are just factored in there as far as listing out a specific set of skills, proficiency bonuses for the monsters. You still can get their ability bonuses in case you need to make a call on that for if they're using their abilities. So it's combined into a single set of modifiers that are easier to use. In their ability bonuses. Monster weaknesses to specific materials such as silver have been removed, and they're now represented as special properties of a weapon. So you're not going to see lycanthropes vulnerable to silver. When you get a silver weapon, a property of the weapon is that it's more effective against, say, a werewolf or a were-rat or something like that. And those are just minor sort of editorial decisions. I think the big thing that I've noticed with the mechanically from what we would expect to see is they dropped alignment, which had very limited mechanics in 5e anyway, and then they've replaced inspiration with luck, and then the monsters are just a little more streamlined and cleaned up for it's easier to just look at the stat block and know how to apply a bonus and what die to roll without having to do any kind of figures in your head. Although it's not that bad, but it is nice to have it a little more streamlined. What we traditionally call race, which would be species and D&D proper 5.5, have been split into lineage and heritage. So if you think about, and we were already headed this way, that what they've said, even the designers of D&D 5e, is the idea that you've got a set of abilities for elf, dwarf, halfling, gnome, whatever, and those are reflective of some of their innate physical abilities. So the dwarves are hardy and they're resistant to poison and things like that. That's an overall dwarf trait, for example. But then when you get into the difference, say hill dwarves, mountain dwarves, other types of dwarves, those are cultural, based on the culture of mountain dwarves, the culture of hill dwarves. So you could take a hill dwarf baby with hill dwarf parents, but if they're raised among mountain dwarves, they're going to have those mountain dwarf things because those reflect the culture of a mountain dwarf. Same with wood elves versus high elves. So they're already doing that, I think, in D&D, and then that's just sort of up here. You've got a lineage, and then you've got a heritage. The lineage is your sort of biological species, and the heritage is reflective of more where your the community, the culture that you grew up in. So you can create sort of the classic D&D sub-races by, say, pairing elf with different or dwarf with different heritages. But it doesn't say what you have to do in the book, so you can mix and match. So players can be very creative, or the game master can say, hey, here's sort of how I want to take these options and sort of pair some things together to get a very specific feel. If I want to go for the classic D&D feel, then if you're going to play an elf, you should pick one of these two, ignore the others. Or you could be a little more flexible, or you could say, well, truly, what happens when you raise a dwarf among elves? There you go. um, there aren't any. I noticed that there aren't any half elves, or half orcs. I think there's some stuff in the player's guide about how you might approach that. This the backgrounds that you're familiar with, maybe from 5e. Now you got your lineage and your heritage, and you've got a background, which is more what we think about with backgrounds. Those give you again some skills, and they've kind of erased a lot of those. Every background in 5e comes with the kind of an ability, a special feature. Some of them are really cool, but then some of them have caused cause for complaint. For example, the Outlander allows you to just lead you and your party successfully through the wilderness, which completely kind of takes some of the stick away from rangers and druids. You can stick that Outlander background on anybody else, and now they're kind of effectively a ranger in a lot of ways. So you don't see that here. But instead, you get a talent, which is what they're calling feats. So you basically get a feat, and again, that echoes kind of where regular D&D was headed with the way they're retooling the backgrounds. Anyway, that's the big changes that jumped out that would affect during character creation. So the default, or should I say, just the core lineages that they've put in the player's guide: dwarf, elf, human, and then they have small folk. So they don't have gnomes and halflings. They've just got kind of small folk, which then there's some stuff in there about how to use that to create a halfling or a gnome. But you could also use it to create other kinds of small folk for a different kind of setting. More that archetype of small people. So not humans with dwarfism, but halflings, gnomes, brownies, whatever you might want to call them. They do have orc in there. They also have kobold in there. I think I mentioned before, when I sort of talked about wanting to do a review on this, they do put orcs and kobolds in there as primary playable lineages. Then they've got the Siderian, which is a plain touched. The two options they give you there would conform to the Tiefling and Aasimar that you're familiar with from modern D&D. But I think very easily, probably with supplements or with a little creativity on the part of the GM, you could also go ahead and pull in some of the other kind of plain touched, like Genocide, which have that genie bloodline in their ancestry, or other stuff like that. And then they have the Beastkin. Rather than give us the Tabaxi, the Aarakocra, the endless parade of now at point, I think there are just as many D&D races that are anthropomorphized animals as there are conventional fantasy races. It's just Beastkin, and it gives you some general ideas of how to sort of create different sorts of anthropomorphized or humanoid creatures that have, and how you could just pick most sort of, whether you wanted to be a bear or a wolf or some kind of bird or lizard or whatever. There's stuff enough in there that you could do it and flesh it out. So from what I see here is they're giving you not super defined species or races the way we've seen in D&D. They're giving you the tools to sort of create most of the fantasy archetypes or tropes that you would find with an eye for what kind of fits in with their existing Midgard setting. So that's pretty cool. The classes, which is probably what most people are interested in, you've got your 12 standard D&D classes as we come to know them from 5e. The Bard, the Cleric, the Druid, the Fighter, the Monk, Paladin, Ranger, Rogue, Sorcerer, Warlock, and Wizard. They've got two sub classes for each. So for the Bard, it's the College of Lore and the College of Victory, which I think becomes sort of I think it's a College of Valor is what it is in the player's handbook. The barbarian, I think I failed to mention barbarian a minute ago when I listed through. They've got a berserker and a wild fury barbarian, which is that beast totem barbarian. I'm going to come back to some of these other classes. I'm not going to go in the alphabetical order. Fighter, the two you've got they don't have the champion fighter, which is that kind of generic fighter. You could probably pull the champion fighter from the player's handbook for D&D if you wanted to play that and put it in here just fine. They've got the Spellblade, which is the Eldritch Knight, and a Weapon Master, which is the Battle Master, which is kind of the cool to have that as the default non-magical fighter, where it's just all about mastering martial techniques with your weapons and your armor and your shields. That's always been my favorite expression of the fighter in sort of modern D&D anyway. The monk, they've got an open hand technique, and then the flickering dark, which is again sort of a shadow monk ninja style of character. Paladins, you've got an oath of justice, an oath of devotion. They dropped the oath of the ancients, which was more, I think, tied to like the fae and nature. You've got a ranger, you've got a hunter, and then the pack master, which is the with a beast companion. All of this, it's sort of it's more of a mystical animal spirit that you sort of summon into physical form. I kind of like the idea of a ranger still being able to just have a bear that they met in the woods, and that's what it is. It really is a bear, not some animal spirit that's taken the form of a bear or a wolf. But again, I think there are enough other 5e resources out there. You could find a way to do that for a ranger and not have to go into that if you don't care for it. Or you could just use the old, the one again from the D&D where it's just a regular mundane animal, right? For the rogue subclasses, you've got the thief and you've got an enforcer, which is kind of it subsumes the assassin, but it also sort of lets you build almost kind of a strength-based rogue that's just sort of a thug, just sort of a knee breaker kind of rogue, which I think is kind of neat. It's something the game is needed, and so that's kind of cool. The sorcerer subclasses, you have a chaos sorcerer, which is that we have a version of that, and then a draconic bloodline sorcerer. Warlock, you've got a fiendish pact warlock and a reaper patch, which is more about death than the undead, which is sort of not reflect. I don't think they have anything like that really in the core 5e player's handbook. So here's what's interesting though with the wizard, druid, and cleric. With the cleric, the cleric is the only one that gives us 3 subclasses: a life domain, a light domain, a war domain. They mention other domains might come. There's also, when they talk about gods and in one of the appendixes, there are other domains that may come from other future supplements, or you can pull them out of 5e if you want. But you could still, the way they've written these, the life, light, and war domain, I think you could cover a broader spectrum of types of clerics using those, and maybe you could the way they had narrowed them down in 5e. With the druid, you get 2 druid subclasses: a shifter, which is more the sort of circle of the moon, focuses on their wild shape ability, and then the leaf druid, which is more of a little more spell focused druid. What's interesting there with the themes is you've kind of got a leaf druid, which is focused more on being attuned to plants, and a shifter druid, which is more attuned to focused on being attuned to animals. I think that's a really interesting thematic choice there. And with the wizard, they've abandoned the schools of magic for what shapes wizards. And we've got a battle mage, which is focused on how they use their magic in war, and we've got a cantrip adept, which learns a broader range of cantrips, and it speaks to more sort of versatility in their basic magic ability. So they've standardized the subclasses to all start at 3rd level. And to get a subclass feature at the same levels, every for every class. So you get 3rd, 7th, 11th, and 15th. Those are the levels where you get a subclass option, regardless of what subclass you've chosen. And there's some instructions in that they give on if you want to pull in a subclass from, say, 5e or from another 5e supplement, not from Wizards of the Coast, and you want to try to fit that in there. There's some guides on how to do that. So I noticed for what they did then, probably the ones that affects the most are, I believe wizards used to pick their subclass at second level. Clerics had to do it at first level. Warlocks had to do it at first level, um, and so that helps. That helps with that. It standardized that. It's a little more predictable about when everybody's going to at third level kind of come into their kind of specialty. I also, interestingly, I don't know if the system itself, I don't have enough experience with it, would hold up, but it also sort of speaks to the idea, well, what if I wanted to take the fighter class and give it a ranger subclass? Well, I don't know. It might not. You have to look and see how those interact with your core class abilities and your subclass abilities. But at least the level progressions should match up if you wanted to experiment with something like that. So that's kind of neat. That's kind of it. I don't have enough experience to kind of go into other stuff. I think if you've played 5e, this is not going to be that strange. Particularly if you played 5e long enough to adapt to some of their kind of rules errata and sub changes and how they've sort of introduced new subclasses and new playable species into the game. This shouldn't be a, a big hurdle for anybody that's played 5e. And it shouldn't be more difficult than 5e is for anybody who's never played 5e. So it is a modern game. It's very crunchy. I don't think it's as crunchy as, say, Pathfinder, but it is, I think, on par with kind of the complexity we've gotten out of 5e D&D so far. But it's not, you're not having to do Wizards Hasbro. I can use this 5e library I've collected and adventures I've not got to, supplements I've not got to, and don't have to buy any more stuff from Hasbro if I don't want to. So what I would like to do ultimately is use this to run some of these classic adventures, original adventures reincarnated from Goodman Games, like the Dark Tower, the Caverns of Thracia that's just finished its Kickstarter. I've got Temple of Elemental Evil, Castle Amber, The Lost City, Expedition to the Barrier Peaks, the Isle of Dread, keep on the Borderlands. So we have these 5e conversions that Goodman Games have done, which are very good. And now here's a way to kind of have a playable kind of fresh take on 5e again between Goodman Games and Kobold Press. I don't have to give any more money to Hasbro or Wizards of the Coast if I don't want to. Anyway, that's it. I think that's a pretty long ramble on these. The Game Master's Guide, they did a follow-up Kickstarter for that. That's coming out sometime next year. At this point, though, I think with most like D&D style games, the GM is really more about advice on how to run the game, and other than having like the magic items in there, which are oftentimes pretty central to the game, most of what you need is in the player's handbook, and that kind of is echoed here. It's the rules for running the game at the table are all in the player's guide. You've got a separate book of monsters, so they push those two out first, and then there'll be a GM's guide coming out with more, I guess, about how to build campaigns, advice to GMs. But if you're already experienced doing that stuff and you just want to play, well, the player's guide and the monsters vault are really what you need. So check out it'll be up on Carl's YouTube channel, the live play from our what we got. Oh, I forgot to mention, the one class I didn't mention, the mechanist, I think is how you would say it. That is their version of the Artificer. Now, the Artificer is intellectual property of Wizards of the Coast, of Hasbro. So they can't, they can get away with these other kind of open names of the classes, but the Artificer belongs to Hasbro. So they created this mechanist, which sort of fills the same niche, but it's designed very differently. I don't think you could ever be accused of stealing their design, their ideas, but it fills that same niche. And of course, the two subclasses they have one that focuses on enhancing your armor and weapons, so you can be like Iron Man or Boba Fett or the Mandalorian or someone like that. And then they've got one that then focuses on actually having spells and being a little more about infusing magic, that classic Artificer, infusing magic into items on the fly. And so my son played one of those, and he played a Beastkin and made it out of Rocket, a raccoon. So pretty clearly you could see he's inspired by Rocket Raccoon. So we've got a fantasy version of Rocket Raccoon at the table. Carl played a Kobold Sorcerer, who's just one of the pre-gens they've put out. Amy played a human fighter, which is one of the pre-gens that they played at. So we played through. We got a couple other players interested in joining us in the coming weeks. I think somebody's going to play a barbarian and somebody's going to play a rogue. So we'll see how those turn out. The big thing, I guess I can comment on fighters, what they've done with the fighter, and also I guess the ranger and the paladin as well, is instead of picking a fighting style at a certain level, you have all those fighting styles. So in 5e, you pick, I'm a sword and board fighter, and so I have, if I've got a shield equipped and I'm wielding a shield, there are ways I can use that as part of my action to protect others. If I'm wielding two weapons, I get some bonuses for, or remove some of the penalties or downsides of fighting with a weapon in each hand. The fighters have all that. They have all that. They have four of them. I think the paladin and the ranger don't have all four of them, but they each have two. The Rangers focusing more on like archery and dual wielding, and the Paladin focusing more on armor and defense or fighting with a big two-handed weapon. But they just get those, and it's just a matter of if you have the right combination of weapons and shield equipped to be able to use that ability. So the fighters don't have to pick; they can and that was kind of cool that Amy could select which one she wanted based on kind of what loadout, and she actually chose to kind of put her shield on her back and wield two hand axes and dual wield through most of the game, and it was pretty cool, pretty kind of cool the way that worked out. The other thing is that weapons have a property, not all of them, but most of them have some sort of special property called a weapon option that lets you do something in lieu of damage if you want to. So, slashing weapons, a lot of them have what's called a hamstring property, which you reduce somebody's movement with an in lieu of damage. A lot of the blunt ones have a bash, which sort of stuns them a little bit. Some of the piercing ones, particularly those that can do it ranged, have a piercing shot where you pierce and it has an effect. I'm not going to go through all the details, but you get the point. So it's really kind of cool because Amy is, her fighter character is wielding two hand axes that have that hamstring property, and by activating that fighter ability of equipping two hand axes where you're fighting with two, she effectively gets 3 attacks per round. The second two come with lesser damage if she was going to do damage, but that combination kind of struck us toward the end of, you got 3 shots at a guy, and one of those could be that weapon property, so you could try to hamstring them or something like that. So again, it gives people wielding weapons, when you think about particularly fighters, paladins, rangers, monks and rogues, when they if a monk may typically want to focus on their unarmed strikes, but if they're using a quarterstaff or a weapon, that gives them some other things they can kind of do just as a logical use of how people would probably use those weapons in combat. So it's a really neat addition to the game, I think, that fleshes that out. So I think something like that is supposed to be coming with D&D 5.5, but I haven't really looked to it. So anyway, that's my review. Tales of I like it so far. I'm really excited about it. It's scratching that modern gaming itch that I have. I'm not abandoning my old school games by any means. But this is one that was easy to get up and running pretty quick, and I got a lot of materials that don't make me have to do a lot of prep for it. So I think what we're going to do is I'm kind of looking through the various, because it's Kobold Press, I'm looking through the Book of Layers, and they have a companion Book of Layers for every one of their monster books. So I'm looking through those for ideas of, we'll do a couple at first level and kind of loosely a campaign, not anything big. And then if we can get up to high enough level, we might dive into one of these Goodman Games chosen. I'm really looking at Dark Tower, and the materials for Dark Tower start at 6th level, so I can kind of a loose kind of dungeon of the week to get them up to 6th, and then if everybody's still interested, we can go do into sort of a formal campaign setting like that. So anyway, let me know if you have questions. Let me know what you think. Love to hear the feedback. You can on Discord or by email, or all the things will be kind of listed in the show description and then during the music at the end here. So thanks for sticking with me and listening to this. And until I come back, wherever you are out there, take care of yourself and try to make somebody happy today. Thanks for listening to the Arcane Alienist podcast. The music you're hearing is Come and Get It by Scott Holmes Music. The cover art is by Dave Bone. Be sure to check out his stuff at ironseer.com. You can leave me a message. I have my SpeakPipe account linked to the show description. You can also send me an email at arcane.alienist@gmail.com. Just embed a voice memo, or I'll just read the text to your email during a future episode. Once again, thanks so much for listening.